What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Ableton Music Producer Podcast. This is Dan Giffin. You might have noticed that we had a different song this time around as an intro. That's actually a new track I'm releasing with my band, Philia. And I would actually love to hear the music that you guys are making out there listening right now. So if you go to liveproducersonline.com/podcast, scroll to the very bottom of the page, and you could submit one of your songs to be featured in the podcast. And if I choose you, then I would love for you to share the podcast with your friends, post about it, and I would definitely, love just to share the love of all the music that is being made right now in this crazy time. So yeah, if you guys want to, go to liveproducersonline.com/podcast and send me your music. I'd love to hear it. So our guest today is Tommy Zee, who founded Tommy Zee and Company. And Tommy and his team have worked with some really interesting brands and companies, such as Honda, Toyota. He's worked with the Canadian Olympics team and has done work with animated films. He's worked with some really cool people, and he's going to give us a lot of good insights today on what it looks like to work with a production house and what the process looks like to work with a brand behind the scenes in a company and kind of cast their vision for a commercial or film. He also gives great insight on anybody who wants to get involved doing that and getting your foot into the door to do this kind of work. Also, heads up, the Ableton Live trial has been extended for 90 days. If you already didn't know that, definitely jump on that while you can. If you are ready to pull the trigger and purchase Ableton Live, just go to liveproducersonline.com/buyableton. That's liveproducersonline.com/buyableton, and I could hook you up. Much love, everybody. Thanks for checking out the podcast once again. And now for today's episode with Tommy Zee. I just want to learn more about you, like your background with music, and how did you get started with doing this music production company for other companies? Like what's your background?
A lot of musicians, you kind of have this call for some reason. You gravitate from an early on to sounds, to music in a way that you just don't want to be a consumer, but you actually want to, you're curious and you want to participate in this magic that is, creating sound on one hand and then having people react to it somewhere out there. So that was fascinating to me from very early on as a child, that this speaker is doing things to me. People who are generating these sounds and sending them through the speaker are like these magicians, they're like, they're basically like just doing some voodoo here, right? So that was there all along. I was always dabbling with music. In high school, I was, the funny thing is, like, I grew up in Europe until I was 12, and then I moved to Canada when I was 12. And when I was growing up in Europe, I was more into like heavy metal and Anthrax and speed metal and all these weird, even punk, like anything that was on the fringe. It shows how music is kind of like, you're going to be affected by it differently wherever you are. So when I came to Canada, we landed in this rough part of Toronto, and I had to, we lived in this like shoddy place in the shoddy part of Toronto. And I remember being influenced by hip hop and, all sorts of rap. We called it rap back then. I mean, hip hop kind of came later, but then I really got into that. Like, it was just amazing to me, the combination of rhythm and rhyme. And I wasn't even analyzing things. It just hit me. Like it was just irresistible. So then when I got in high school, I got into rapping and trying to imitate the art form that I was fascinated by. And then in university, I got into DJing, and that turned from a hobby into like a pretty serious thing, because even after I graduated and I went off and got a day job, I was pretty heavy into DJing. I had 4 residencies and various nightclubs in Toronto. Yeah. So
that's awesome, man. What was your, if you don't mind me just distracting you for a second, what were you using for DJing? Like, were you using CDJs? Like,
we started with vinyl. When I started my career, it was literally vinyl. Like, every DJ was doing vinyl. There was not even CDJs at that point. And this is not that long ago. Like, I started DJing in 1997, 1998. It was all vinyl. I mean, some people were using CDs, but they were like these awkward Denon CD players that were like huge, and
Very different than they are today.
very different.
Yeah,
Like pitch control was like this big, you
right.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and so then from DJing, I got into music production and I started dabbling with it late 90s, early 2000s. And yeah, I started DJing less and less, making more and more music. But still, I wasn't sure like how that would be a full-time career
Mhm.
because getting paid for music was quite sporadic even back then.
Yeah.
You do a remix here, you do a remix there, you get paid. Somebody would license your song to a compilation. We still had compilations back then, like CD compilations.
Mhm.
It was all too sporadic, and it wasn't until I discovered like advertising, making music for brands, that I realized, okay, this like fits all the parameters that I need, which is I don't have to leave the studio. I don't have to be a star on stage.
I can get paid.
I get paid, yeah,
Yeah.
pretty regularly, once you're in
Yeah.
a business, like
Yeah.
it's competitive, but I would say it's probably more reliable than counting on streaming royalties or things like this if you have established yourself within the business.
Mhm.
Because even if you establish yourself with streaming royalties, you have to be like some kind of a star to keep that stuff going.
Mhm.
Otherwise, like I know guys who are surviving off of streaming royalties, but you have to keep hustling to keep putting out new material
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to build that up. So yeah, I've been there ever since. Since it's been 15 years. That's been my bread for the last 15 years, man.
It's a long journey, but I mean, you're working with some really cool clients right now. You've got Toyota. I saw on your site you've worked with Honda. You worked with the Canadian Olympic team, which is really
Yeah,
cool. That's pretty unique.
yeah.
Animated films, a lot of different areas. And what does the process look like? I'm just curious for you now. Like, if it's a new client or even an existing client coming to you and be like, we have this idea. What does that look like with your team and what you're doing?
Yeah. So most of the time, the project will come from a specific person. Let's say a film director who is working with Honda, let's say on a commercial. And this film director has his choice of, just like a Spielberg will choose the composer that he wants to work with for a film. It's similar in commercials in that there are different folks that are responsible for choosing the creative partners they will hook up with to create this commercial. So in some cases, it might be the film director, which is a friend of mine, and he has a campaign that he's working on and he wants to work on it with me. In some cases, it is the ad agency that represents the client that creates the commercial, that created the idea for the commercial, that they will choose, or somebody within the ad agency, like a creative director, will choose to work with a certain music production company, and that might be me. And lastly, it might be a production company who's actually shooting the commercial. So there are like three different um, players that I've mentioned. In rare cases, it might be the production company who will choose, okay, we want to work with this music production company. And there
Mhm.
are various music production companies around the world that specialize in ads. Like they do
Yeah.
nothing but do ads. And I guess I'm one of them. And so that's how these jobs come about. It's really about the relationships. If you know,
Yeah.
if you know a pretty reputable film director who works on a lot of campaigns and you become his friend and you do some great work together, there's a good chance that, he's going to
I'll
call
come
on you.
back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's how it
Yeah.
happened with the Canadian Olympic team. I mean, the director behind that spot is a guy named Mark Siebert, pretty famous film director in the commercial world. So anytime there's like big sports things happening, like let's say a big campaign with famous footballers or whatever, he's the guy. It's not the only thing he does, but like, he kind of established
It's
himself
his niche.
with
Yeah.
Adidas and with all sorts of other brands
Mhm.
as um as the guy who anytime there are stars involved, they call him. So
Yeah.
yeah, we knew each other from Toronto. We've done a few campaigns before then, and when I moved to Europe, I was living in Amsterdam at the time. He called me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do this really awesome thing for the Canadian Olympic team?" And I just left like my post as a full-time music producer at another company at this place called Massive. And I said, yeah, man, I'll do it. But you got to realize I'm on my own now. Like, it's not going to be me and Massive. It's just me. And he's
Yeah.
like, oh, how's your portfolio? How's your reel? I'm like, I got nothing on my reel. It's going to be the first thing on my reel. And
Yeah.
he said, wow, man, that's going to be a great first piece, you know?
Yeah.
So that
That's
shows
cool.
you the power of relationships. Like, once you establish yourself, you have some
Mhm.
credibility, you actually just go by your connections and
Yeah.
trust that people already have in you.
I think it's true for any business or any industry that you're in, you know. It's just you can call it networking or whatever, but in the end of the day, yeah, you're right. It's about relationships and I
Yeah, the
look
relationship has to be backed by some kind of a track record. So
right.
it's trust and likability. The trust comes from the fact that you've gone to war together, so you've
Mhm.
seen each other in battle, and
Mhm.
so the trust comes from there,
Right.
and not from like a LinkedIn status or like, you
You have
know,
a lot of followers on Instagram or
or yeah, whatever.
yeah,
That kind of metric, which is meaningless until you go into battle with somebody.
right.
And the other thing is likability. You
Yeah.
could have amazing skills, and yet in the creative business, some people might not want to work with you because of your frequencies don't align.
Mhm.
If you
Like
don't have chemistry, like how you gonna? It doesn't matter how skilled somebody is.
right.
If you don't have chemistry, it's not likely that you're gonna produce genius. And even if you do, it's not gonna be that enjoyable. And creative people tend to enjoy themselves or try to at least enjoy themselves while they're creating, right?
It's
Otherwise,
very true.
we'd be selling vacuum cleaners.
Right. Yeah, or toothbrushes or some other something.
Not
Yeah,
that there's
that's
anything wrong with that, but like,
right. Yeah,
it's not, it's a different kind of
true.
job.
No, I mean it is a very performance driven industry that you're in or that we're in with like music business for sure. So yeah, talk a little more on the details of like the process. Like you know, that was an awesome first gig for you moving out of Massive on your own with a
Yeah.
Canadian Olympic team. That's pretty dope. What did that process look like when they're like, okay, we have this idea. Usually, like, what does that look like going back and forth to try to produce and score something that works?
So the process is, first of all, there is usually, though not always, some kind of a rough version of the film, rough edit. It's probably not going to look like the final film,
Hmm.
but it will already have like a general structure. Maybe the special effects are not there yet. So, but you have a kind of a working edit, a working rough footage. Usually they will already, in editing that rough footage, have laid up something up against that footage. So it'll be like a temporary track, an idea, maybe an existing track that works really well, because editors like to cut to music. I mean, a lot of editors have a hard time to just like create a structure visually without having a backing track that can set the pace, set the tempo, and even create an arc. As in, like, okay, here's an intro where we draw people in, and then we're gonna like establish a groove to get people sort of hypnotized, and then we're going to hit them with a little surprise at the end, like a
Hmm.
peek. So normally by the time I get this footage, there's already like a good idea of what they want.
Okay.
They laid up some things against it. Sometimes there isn't, and then they will just give me the rough footage and say, we don't know, like we tried a bunch of things but nothing is really working.
Hmm.
So
I imagine in that they're giving you some very like structured time limit, like, hey, this commercial's 30 seconds, or something up front, so you can already just kind of have a rough estimate as far as creating transitions or that buildup or whatever.
yeah, you
Sure.
always know what the duration of the film is going to be ahead of time, because normally, before you even get with the creative process going, like you have to establish, are you going to do this? Like, what's the deadline? What's the budget? Are
Yeah.
you saying yes to it? So normally that's the first conversation that happened. That wasn't the conversation that happened in this project as a first conversation, because of this relationship where the film director called me directly. But
Yeah.
normally it'll be a little more official, where a producer, what's called a producer from an ad agency. Sorry, my door's opening because I got a draft, and I
You're
propped up
fine.
my door with one of my synths.
You
So
propped
I'm
up your
quite
door with a scent.
surprised. Yes, I'm quite surprised that I'm hearing the creaking from the door now. And
That's
I'm like,
funny.
I hope it doesn't tip the synth over.
I feel like that's when you know you have a lot of sense, when you're using them as door props.
Yeah, not
That's
using
awesome.
them as a door stopper,
Yeah.
just as a prop.
Yeah.
Um,
That's funny.
yeah, man. But yeah. So anyway, so yeah,
Well,
in this case, he called me directly, and then the process is like, okay, here is what we have. Here is what we're thinking. You know, can you hook us up? And then I go off, and I go off and I try to decide, okay, what do I need to do here? Like, is this something that I can do myself as a composer? Is this something where I will need to get a very specific talent? Like, so I have a roster of composers basically, and
okay.
they all specialize in different things. Some guys are really good at orchestral. Some guys are really good at electronic and orchestral. Some guys are really good at indie singer songwriters. Some guys are really good at like electronic, beat driven sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, I'm like a chef, and I'm a chef and I don't necessarily cook, you know.
Yeah.
A Gordon Ramsay doesn't have to cook. He
Great.
can. He
He's got,
loves cooking, but
yeah.
he's running a business. So it's like the same for me. People go to Gordon Ramsay's restaurant because of Gordon Ramsay. So I might get a project because of the relationships that I have. And then the people on the other end basically trust me that the music I will make or the dishes we will cook
Yeah.
are going to taste great. And they don't know exactly how I go about doing it. They don't
Right.
know which composer I'm working with. They don't even care. They just
Yeah.
care that the dish sounds really good.
Yeah.
So that's my next step, just to line all the people, go, okay, I'm going to send this out to two guys. One, I'm going to send after this particular direction. Let's do something like Johan Johansson, Sicario, edgy, electronic meets orchestral.
Yeah.
Then let me go after a more electronic guy where it's just going to be like sound design driven, really electronic, really goosebumpy.
Yeah.
And then let me try something myself where it's going to be maybe less musical and more sound driven. So
Mhm.
more like sound design turning into a composition. Just to give you an example. And then we go cook and then we create demos for, sometimes we have a day, sometimes we have 2 days, sometimes we have a week to
Yeah.
create the demos. And then I will personally send the work over to whoever is the sort of the cook or the chef on the other side. So either it'll be the creative director or the film director, whoever's sort of creatively in charge on the
Yeah.
other side.
You
I will
just give
share
them
the
all these dishes and let them kind of
give
choose the
them the
favorite.
dishes. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes they say, "Holy shit, amazing! Like all three are fantastic," which is rare. Although that's great when it happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes they go, "Yeah, you know what? We like number one, so let's keep working on that." And sometimes they say, "We don't like anything." And those are the tough jobs when you kind of deliver something and they're not feeling it, and
Mhm.
you got
So
to go
talk
back.
about that. If they're like, no, we're not interested, and like, how do you overcome issues like that where it's like this? You have two different paradigms of what it should be, and you're trying to like work that out. Like, how do you overcome that remotely with somebody going
So
back and forth?
sometimes it ends there. Like in the process of creating music for ads, sometimes what you have is what's called a pitch, where they will invite Tommy Zee and Co. They will invite Massive, and they will invite another company.
Okay.
And basically, that initial demo round submission determines who gets to go forward. So sometimes, if they don't like anything from me, but they like something from another company, then I'm out. You know,
Yeah.
you get
And then,
paid a demo fee for just creating the demos, but
so you still get something for actually submitting.
sometimes,
Okay.
most of the time, yeah. Sometimes you don't, but that's really up to you whether you want to do it then.
Right.
So to give you an example, there might be a Nike commercial that comes from London, let's say, and I look at it and I'm like, holy shit, that would be amazing to work on this thing. And they're like, you know what, we don't really have budget for it, but just extending a courtesy call. If you want to pitch in, do it. If you don't, then we'll talk to you later.
Hmm.
So that's my decision. If I want to do it, I do it. And then if you lose, you lose. With Canadian Olympic team, it was a dedicated job to me from the film director. So I
Right.
didn't have to compete with anyone.
That's nice.
And luckily, like we managed to get somewhere. I think our initial first two submissions were actually not something that they loved. So they had a certain idea, and we tried to come up with our own idea that was based on their idea, but they really, really liked their reference track or the
Hmm.
mood or the
Yeah.
temp track, as they call it in Hollywood. And so we ended up just sticking closer to that. And, you know, things like sirens, like they had a siren in their track. And we tried to create something else that was more sound design based. That was kind of like a siren, but different. You know, they just said straight up, no, we really love the siren. So I'm like, okay, we'll just use the siren, you know?
Yeah.
Usually when they don't like anything you've submitted, you try to then understand, okay, who is the head chef over there? Who's calling the shots? What did they like? You know, if there's a head chef, let's say a creative director at an ad agency, and he just loves, um, I don't know, Jimi Hendrix, let's
Yeah.
say. And, you know, you just know that if he put that under the film, if you get away from that, you're not going to have success. Like they're just not
Yeah.
open to a new vision. Um, Sometimes they are, you know, it's like, it's a really weird world where it's hard to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I got into this business literally by ignoring all of the briefs that were sent my way because I didn't know how to make them. So like when I first got in, I remember I worked on a Mitsubishi spot where the reference was Wolf Mother, I think. This is like 15 years ago. So like
Okay.
really fast rock and roll sort of stuff. And I'm like, I'm not that guy, you know?
Right.
So like
Yeah.
some guys did rock and roll, they sent it forward and I did a drum and bass track. Like literally 165 beats per minute. Um, you know, and they were like, holy crap, what is this? Like this is great.
They're
You
like,
know,
what is drum and bass? Yeah.
it was never in their like, or it was never in on their compass
Yeah.
because their musical taste. But like,
Well, and it's nice that you have a team with you where you can actually send them quickly a fast turnaround of multiple different things so that they can hear something new, like you were just saying, and being like, oh, wow, like, damn, I didn't realize. I've never heard music like this. This is perfect kind of thing. Like,
yeah, yeah. So sometimes, but rarely these days, it happens that you could send them something totally different, but it does the right thing for the campaign, and you know, it makes them feel what they intended the audience to feel
mhm.
without necessarily being the thing they thought it would be.
Right. So what I'm hearing is most of this business is really just managing expectations and being able to act upon them of what you think that they're wanting.
Yes, very much
It's
so,
just a
and it's
very
not easy.
right, yeah, it's a very subjective field to be in for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you could agree with them verbally during a conference call about everything. I
Hmm.
mean, there's all sorts of epic conference calls where, because I'm quite good at communicating and talking and verbalizing, and so is like a lot of, you know, like Hans Zimmer. I think that's his main talent, is he's a talker.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, you know, like Steve Martin once said, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. You could talk, I could describe to you better than you can what kind of music you want for your commercial. They'll be like, yes, yes, yes. But then you got to go out and make it, you know? And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
where the trouble might begin, is
Right.
that my interpretation of what is, let's say, I don't know, mature but not stiff might differ from what they consider mature but not stiff,
Right.
or, you know, whimsical but not comical. Like,
Yeah. My
you know,
favorite is when I'm mastering for some clients of mine and like they use terms like just make it better or just make the vocals fat. Okay, like very different terms than you and I would be talking in when it comes to music production. But
yeah, and that's why, you know, a lot of it comes down to taste and sensibility. And again, I think that's why certain people want to work with certain people, because you don't have to talk. I mean, it's almost as if you've done so much back and forth with real music already, and that did the talking. In other words, the actual music was the very thing your client wanted to hear that way. And so they don't know how to describe it, but they just like every time you do something to their music. So it's the
Hmm.
same here, you know, it's kind of like your sensibility, your way of doing things musically, and also generally your way of doing things is going to determine who wants to work with you, because that's how
Right.
people choose who they want to work with
Right.
based on your personality and what it is that you actually do musically.
Yeah. Um, well, let's just nerd out a little bit, like technically. I'm just kind of curious your process on a technical level. Like you get this video from somebody and they're like, hey, here's 30 seconds of a really rough edit. There's no audio, but this is the visual. Like how do you take that video? Do you like load that into a DAW and then start producing, watching it as it's happening in real time? Like what does that look like?
Oh, so I have a process which basically, you know, I'm not musically trained. I'm not musically educated whatsoever. I mean, I have no idea what scale I'm in, what notes I'm using. I don't know. I have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah,
I
my
don't
music theory is not that fantastic either. It really
I
isn't.
don't know anything about engineering other than my stuff will sound good. But like if you ask me um what threshold I used on the compressor, I don't know, man. I don't know. I just know what to do to make things
Get
jump out of the speaker. But there is a process, and there has to be a process, because the problem with musicians is that and luckily I don't have this problem, and musicians in my business don't have this problem, because we only have 2 days to turn around the track.
Yeah, you have to work
uh,
fast.
you have to work fast, and so you have to have a certain process in the workflow, and that's something I teach my students in a master class, but I can describe it to you very quickly.
Mhm.
The first thing I do is drag the video into my DAW, which happens to be Ableton. I will then the first thing I do is just sort of gauge what tempo this thing should be. And so I will look at the film muted with the metronome on and start adjusting the BPM to a place where I can just go, you know, and go, that's a bit too rushed, you know?
Mhm.
Maybe it needs to have like a lot of power, but it needs to be slow, like 80 BPM, you know?
Mhm.
It just needs to like stomp like a gorilla. Maybe that's right. Or it needs
Yeah,
to be like middle of the line tempo, like a confident strut, 110 BPM. Or
yeah, I love a
so
good confident strut kind of tempo. That's good.
yeah, and you're looking for two things. One, can you sort of sing along in your head and create a rhythm with your mouth and it kind of feels right? But the
Mhm.
second thing is like, are the cuts in the edit more often than not lining up to this tempo?
Mhm.
And that's it's partly like your intuition, like you're kind of like, oh man, I love the way the metronome is just falling on these cuts, the most important cuts. Not every cut, but like
Mhm.
there are moments in a film that are very, very important. And it has to, music should dance very elegantly during those moments. Those
Mhm.
are the moments of hypnosis, like
Yeah.
where you don't want things not to glue. You
Yeah.
want to glue.
Right.
Um,
So let me ask you this: have you ever sent like an edit back? Because I know, and we're both Ableton, people. So I mean, I know you can chop video by editing the clip inside of
yeah,
like arrangement view.
yeah.
Have you ever ended up timing up some of the video and chopped some of the video to fit the music and sent that
No,
back to the director? Never?
you
Okay.
don't want to do that.
Yeah. I mean,
No,
as a like
because you
yeah,
don't want to do that because there is a process that they're going through to get the edit to a certain point.
right. I was
So
thinking
there's
if it
a
was
project
still
team and
in the
like
early phase. Yeah.
no, I mean usually by the time the music happens, you know, we're the last stage in the
Yeah,
process, one before last because they're still coloring,
gotcha.
but normally, yeah, you don't want to do that. You don't want to rearrange the edit in any way.
Yeah.
What might happen is you might say, do you see how the music is like just doing something magical there? You know, if we were able to just shorten that
Right.
scene by if you know, you can mention it in an email.
That's kind of what I was thinking more so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But you try to do as much as possible for the music to cater to the edit,
Yeah.
and not expect the editor to change the edit, because a lot of times, because they're going through a process and there's like 20 people on the
Yeah.
project team, the
Yeah.
client, the agency, the brand, they go through, okay, rough edit approved. Okay, next. Now we work on the offline, right? So once I establish the tempo, the next thing I do is, and this is really key, because this is what allows you to work really fast and effectively and creatively at the same time, is I will draw an outline of the house, what I call. And Quincy Jones taught me this,
I
not
love
directly,
Quincy
of course,
Jones.
but
Yeah.
like he said, first you use chalk to draw an outline, then you use watercolors, and then you use oil. And that's a perfect
Oh,
analogy for,
it's good.
don't be freaking twiddling with the hi-hat when you don't even know where this thing begins, where this thing ends, and where's the peak in the middle. Because that's just nonsense. Like, that's what dabbling amateurs do. When you
That's
have
really good advice.
when
Yeah.
you have a hobby as a music, and you can twiddle the hi-hat for 2 months and then complain about how you need the latest plugin before you release a track.
Right.
None of it is true. And
Right.
the,
Amen.
yeah, the difference between an amateur and a pro is that a pro will just get the track shipped. Like, they will just get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Plug-in, no plug-in, whatever, man. You don't need it. You could use the basic version of Ableton to create magic.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
uh,
exactly right. That's something I always tell my students is focus on finishing before perfecting,
yeah,
especially when you're starting out.
yeah.
Because finishing is the hardest part.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we don't have the luxury of wondering when we're gonna finish by. We just have to ship in a couple of days. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the chalk outline I do is I literally draw. I drop markers in Ableton and say, this will be the intro. Okay, I'm watching the film. Okay, this is where the car picks up. Like, this is where you can see that the film is actually getting going. Okay, so here we will need to go into first gear. So I'll go, okay, first gear, let's run first gear for like 2 bars. Okay, now it's getting more dynamic. So, okay, let's do like a little fill here. I'll literally go, okay, 4 beats right here. I do a little fill and then go into gear 4.
Nice.
Okay, great. Okay, and where's the climax here? Okay, it's at second 25. Okay, great. Let me just like create a ramp, build it. So I write like ramp, start ramp here,
Yeah.
climax here, and then the outro, last 4 seconds outro. And then what I do is I take the loop brace and I literally loop the intro. I'm like, okay, I'm not worried about anything right now in the world except for solving the intro. What is the parameter of the intro? The parameter of the intro, the criteria for a successful intro is that it needs to pull you in. It needs to like make room for what's about to come, but it needs to be interesting enough to pull you in. So I
Right.
just loop it, and I'm working in a 1 bar, 2 bar loop, setting some kind of an intro. And then when I'm done with that, I move my loop brace to the next chapter, right?
Okay.
And the next chapter is whatever it needs to be, the first gear. So maybe drop a beat. So then I just work on the beat and nothing else. And then I extend the loop brace to work on gear 4, which is the next thing. So, okay, how do I go from gear 1 to gear 4? And so that's how I work in chapters. And when I'm done with a rough outline for each chapter, it's only then that I will move on to really filling in and optimizing the emotion for that particular moment. And then
Okay.
once I'm done with that, I will work on oil, going with Quincy's analogy, which is
Yeah.
twiddling with the hi-hat, um, putting shimmer, high frequency shimmer on everything,
Yeah.
using
Shimmer.
some reverse, using some reverse
Is
stuff.
that
And
Valhalla Verb Shimmer? Have you played with
no, I
that?
use PSP E27
Okay. I haven't played with that.
emulator, yeah,
Check that out.
but it's a good one. But
There's a
yeah,
lot of toys out there that we could use for this kind of stuff.
yeah, I got tons of things, but I only use like 5 things.
Yeah. And that's true. Like I've had to like force myself with an endless supply of plugins to just really narrow down to just learn a handful of them to know what's in my toolbox. Because
Yeah,
otherwise it's so easy to get lost. But yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah. It's you got
so
to decide like what is it that you need that is essential, and don't waste time with anything else, because in our business, like, because this deadline is short, I don't have time to experiment.
right.
So I have projects that are longer, which are great because then I can use it to learn Omnisphere or use it to learn Serum.
Hmm.
But uh, most projects, I don't have that luxury. I already have to hit the ground running and know exactly where my sounds are,
Yep.
what I'm going to use, and
Yeah.
all that good stuff.
So what advice would you give to somebody who is like new to this and they want to get started scoring for commercials or film? Like, what advice would you give to that person?
Well, the best advice I can give them is like, I worked my ass off to create a comprehensive free training which people can take to
Mhm.
decide whether this is something for them. So,
Yeah.
um,
I'll include links in the show
yeah, include
notes
the
for
link.
anybody listening right now. You can check out the show notes and we'll
Yeah,
drop them in there.
the thing is like, this is the most sensible way to get a comprehensive introduction because our field is a real career path. Okay. So it's not like as if I'm here going, if you just follow these three simple steps, you'll be making money and music
Right.
in no
You'll be
time.
super rich and life will be
Oh
perfect.
man, this is a tough business. And
Yeah.
are there musicians making a full-time living from it? Yes, and there are lots of them, and they're scattered all over the world, and they work from their home studios. Which at a time like this weird time, it's a blessing. We are
Yeah.
grateful that our workflow doesn't really change. Like we just
Yeah.
keep going to our home studio and doing music. So I would say the free training. Maybe even before that, my piece of advice would be to first of all raise your level of awareness about all the different ways that you can actually survive or make a living as a musician. That's the thing that kind of held me back for longer than it should have. When I was DJing and I was working a day job and I was wondering like how the hell can I survive full time? But I was only thinking within the parameters that I already knew. So, okay, so I'm going to have to do, I guess, lots of remixes, or I'm going to have to, get a record deal, or I'm going to have to sell a lot of singles. And the world is so much more interesting and diverse than that. There are
Yeah.
people literally making a full time living from busking. There are
Yeah.
like online courses about busking. Like,
Yeah.
just open your mind to new possibilities and realize that there are myriad of different ways, you know the fundamental shift that I would say is happening is that, and I always talk about this, it's like we're back to the times of Bach. In Bach's day, like, how is it that Bach and Mozart and Handel, all these classical composers, were able to survive as full time musicians? There was no record business, they weren't selling music. How is it that they made it happen?
Right.
So, the paradigm shift that I want people to think about is, instead of thinking about selling your singles for pennies to people who already stream it for free, not exactly sustainable, think about
No.
selling your skills to places that have the money and are
Yeah.
needing this skill,
Sure.
which is like creating original music that fits these commercials, for instance.
Yeah.
And that may open your eyes to a different way of thinking about your music career.
That's great advice. Yeah, because rather than how can I just survive off of the existing streaming and the usual, the whole monetization of independent artists is something that's very difficult, to do on your own. So if you have that skill, who else needs that skill that's willing to pay for it? That's great advice.
That's exactly it. And then, in the training, like I worked hard on it because it's like I find myself repeating myself all the time. Like, and it's not that easy to just simply explain all the things you need to do and how the business works. So that's why I sort of put it together. And it's a way that, in this free training, like I actually pitch people on my course, but that's at the end. By
Hmm.
that time, you already know, like, is this for me or is this not for me?
Right.
Because I've given you enough information. Like, what are the different ways that musicians make money within the business? Because there's different ways and very specific ways. You can do it as a composer, you can do it as a session vocalist, you can do it as a mix engineer who only mixes
Right.
music for commercials.
Hmm.
Like, there's all these different specific functions within the world of music and brands. And yeah, so there I explain how the business works. And then you basically know, like you right away know if you have the DNA, if you're set up that way, if this is a potential thing for
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I know
the
there's.
advice also, like a short-term advice that I might give your listeners is if you create music right now, like, you know, like a lot of musicians have loops, a million loops sitting on their hard drives. I actually put my loops to really good use. It just so happened that like the stuff that I was making in the early 2000s was very, it had this commercial sensibility, but it was still quite edgy, but it started as loops, like nothing. It just loops
Yeah.
that I was just enjoying making that gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I gathered all of those pieces into one folder and basically made a very simple like determination like, okay, which of these things do I picture in a Nike commercial or a Gatorade commercial or like a BMW commercial?
Mm-hmm.
And whatever made the cut, I imported into my DAW, which was I think Logic at the time. I switched to Ableton in like 2006, 7.
Yeah. I still like
And
Logic. Logic's not
yeah,
my.
Logic is great. I just,
It is.
you know, like whoever knows Logic can obviously work wonders.
Mm-hmm.
But I never got to the point with Logic that I did with Ableton. I just felt
Of
more
course.
comfortable
Of
with
course.
Ableton, you know?
Yeah, for good
But
reasons.
but I would tell like, you know, I would say to people, gather all of these loops, gather them. And then what I did is I created a like a 90 seconds really hard hitting reel portfolio, I guess you could call it, like an appetizer,
Yeah.
but it was very seamless. It went from like slow to fast to like really edgy to like really ethereal and ambient, but it was quite effective because in 90 seconds you basically got to know my superpower like
Right.
very quickly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I started sending that out to ad agencies. And this is why, like I tell people, like you need to learn about how the business works before you start contacting people. Because I
Yeah.
basically spent 2 years contacting ad agencies until someone told me to stop it. They said, dude, like no one's going to work with you, man. Stop sending this out to people.
Really?
And then, yeah, because like I didn't know you have to, like ad agencies don't work with individual composers, they work with music production companies.
Hmm.
So you see, so you need to understand how the
Yeah.
business works. As soon as I started sending that reel to like music production companies, they're like, "Oh, come on in for a coffee." You know, it seems you're doing some cool stuff here.
That's
And
good insight.
yeah,
Yeah.
man, that's when my career really like actually started moving forward because someone explained to me, okay, this is who you actually need to contact. This is how you contact them, et cetera, et cetera. So I
Yeah.
would say like gather your stuff from your hard drives, that will give you a really good indication of like your superpower, like your
Mm-hmm.
patterns. What's your DNA sonically?
Yeah.
And then go, you know, go online and just Google Nike commercial, Google BMW commercial, start looking at Super Bowl ads because Super Bowl is like the Hall of Fame of ads. You know, that's when they
Yeah.
produce like the best ads that
For
they can.
sure.
And then see if anything from your loops or your hard drive you see being reflected in the world of music and brands. And if you do, then hey man or woman, you might be a good candidate for a world which you never even knew about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because most musicians don't ever connect it. It's like it's so weird.
It's
They
true.
watch
That's
all these
interesting.
commercials and they're like, "Oh my god, that was so awesome!" And then they're like, they never ask themselves, "Okay, where did the music come from?
Yeah.
Like, who actually made it?"
Yeah.
And they don't realize that 80% of the music, I don't want to, you know, these are not exact stats. I don't
Right.
know, but I can
Right.
tell you that brands can't afford to only license
Right.
famous music. I
That was
mean,
my next thing that I was going to ask is like, yeah, obviously it's so expensive for all that licensing. I mean, why not
they
pay
do it
somebody
once in a
less than
while.
half to just make it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But most of the time, the music comes from, ultimately, the music comes from some guy or girl like you and me sitting in a studio like this,
Mm-hmm.
cranking out demos.
Yep.
And I know this because that's the world I've been in for 15 years, and it's also my job to hire these composers.
Yeah.
And so I know some of these guys make a really, really good living
Yeah.
doing nothing but composing music for ads.
Yep.
This is not the majority. It's not easy. Like I don't want anyone to start like, I don't know, having delusional dreams that, you know, oh, I found my new way, and
Yeah.
everything will change now. It's not easy,
Yeah.
but it's a whole lot more predictable than anything else I see like musicians doing, which is not really having a definite path. Like
Yeah. They're
it's
just
like,
kind of
I'm just gonna make some
floating,
music.
playing random gigs. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hoping
I'm
for the
just
best.
gonna buy some Instagram likes or whatever, and
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 then,
and then then what? Like, what do you expect is gonna
yeah.
happen? What's the end goal? Like,
Right. There's no music genies out there in a lamp that you're going to find one day on the side of the
oh
road that's going to grant all of your wishes.
no.
Yeah.
And I think no matter what happens, brands will always be spending money to create stuff like content that's supposed to keep people excited, energized, frazzled. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
this is the brand's job. Red
Yeah.
Bull is not in the business of creating sugar water with caffeine. That's
Right.
not their business. Like,
No.
people don't understand that. Like,
Yeah.
there's very little difference between the budget energy drink and the
Hmm.
premium energy drink because it's the same ingredients.
Right. It's
The
that
difference between the
image.
price is the story.
The
And
story.
that
Exactly.
and that is the entire task and mission of a brand like Red Bull, is to think about ways to excite you. And when you get excited, you remember, oh, who brought me that excitement? Oh, Red Bull. Right.
Yeah.
It's the same for Coke, man. What do you
Yeah.
think? It's a
Yeah.
magic potion in there. It's caffeinated sugar water,
Right.
right? And like, despite that, even though I'm saying this, people know this already. And even
Hmm.
despite knowing it, you might choose Coke. Like, I choose Coke
Yeah.
whenever I
Yeah.
drink Coke. I don't drink Coke that much, but I prefer Coke over Pepsi, and it's like people just have an affinity for a brand.
Yeah. I mean, they did that Pepsi Coke challenge years ago, right? Where they blindfolded people and they had to taste one or the other. And there was people who were like, "Oh, I always drink Pepsi," and then they drank Coke, and they're like, "Yeah, that's better." And then they're like, "Oh, I had no idea."
I mean,
Like,
unless Pepsi wants to send me a commercial, then, I might say,
yeah, that would be
actually,
nice. That'd be a nice check.
I think Ray Charles actually did like Coke and Pepsi in his lifetime, which is quite interesting. Like,
Yeah,
he appeared in a Coke and in a Pepsi
that
commercial.
is pretty funny.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
he was
So
riding both trains.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah.
So
So I
what?
think, like, one more thing I want to say, which sometimes I come up against, but very rarely these days, is the concept of selling out. Like, some people say, making music for commercials is selling out. But I would say, apart from the argument that like some really credible musicians have done it, like Brian Eno, and yeah, like everybody's doing it. I mean, I don't want to say everybody, because like Tom Waits probably didn't do it and will never do it, but there are a lot of credible musicians, like people
Sure.
we would not consider sellouts, doing it. Apart from that argument, I would ask people to consider that maybe the worst form of sellout is to end up doing something to make money that you don't even have any passion or heart for, like getting a day job that's completely unrelated to your passion and your desire.
Yeah,
Maybe that is the ultimate form of selling out. Like,
that's good. That's
just
really
going,
good. We need to put
you're
that on a
taking a
plaque.
paycheck from the man, and you're not even sitting in a studio.
Yeah,
You're sitting in a damn cubicle or a forklift
yeah,
or behind.
surrounded. Yeah, I mean, that's gonna eat away your soul a lot faster than
I
making
believe
music
so,
for
man. I
somebody
don't
else.
just believe
Yeah,
so. I know
right.
so
It
because
is.
I worked at a bank for 5 years.
Me too, man. I did
Yeah,
the same
okay.
thing.
Bad as it gets sometimes, because when you do what you are passionate about for a living, then you will feel your highs and lows a lot more intensely than when you're just working for the man.
Hmm.
But as bad as things get in my business, and as frustrated and disappointed I am sometimes by not getting a job, by having a slow period, by also by people rejecting the thing we thought was magical, I still can't imagine, having already worked at a corporation, ever going back. If I have to, I will. But I would say that I would rather sell out by writing music, being in the studio, and thereby bettering my craft
Right.
musically
Yeah.
by getting paid from Procter and Gamble or Mitsubishi,
Sure.
and then leaving what I love most until the very last, and approaching it with the energy that is the worst kind of energy. Tired, uninspired, 8 p.m.
Yep. And
I know I got to go back to work tomorrow morning, so I'm just going to doodle on a hi-hat and accept that I will probably never make it.
Yeah, because when you're grinding in a cubicle, you come home, you don't have much energy or inspiration. And if you're making music, even if it's completely for somebody else, you're going to be learning a lot along the way, finding new sample packs, finding new plugins.
Do you think I would ever learn Ableton if I didn't have to learn it? I mean, that's the kind of personality I am. I need pressure in order to thrive. Because when things are left open, I sort of overthink it. I doodle dabble, you know, but I don't get definite with my action.
Yeah.
Whereas here it was quite simple. Like when I got into business, it was like, okay, so 2 days from now we need it. So then I'm figuring out everything as I go along. Okay, how do you reverse in Ableton? Okay, you do it like this. Great. I learned. What's the shortcut for loop brace? Oh, okay, it's Control L. Okay, how do you cut? All these things I learned on the job, and I basically got paid to learn. And honestly, man, the best things I've ever learned about producing music, I've learned because of my career as a craftsperson, as a paid craftsman, and not during my self-taught. I remember when I was trying to teach myself and there was no pressure. It was terrible. I spent tens of thousands of dollars back in the day on samplers, on gear rigs, on all sorts of stuff. And they sat there collecting dust.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the pain got bad enough when I tasted what it's like to spend most of your life sitting in a cubicle that I went, okay, you know what? I'm ready. Okay, now I'm going to get humble. Now I'm going to get humble. And now I'm going to just, if it needs to be hard, let it be hard. I'd still rather endure difficulty and hardship in the studio.
And do what you love still. Yeah. 100. I can completely relate to that story, man. 100%. So thanks for sharing that. That's cool. That's all really good advice and insight. One last real quick thing, and then I know we're getting close on time, but I just wanted to ask you. So you talked about the process of, how you went to ad agencies and then you realized, oh no, like shit, I should be talking to these production houses. If somebody listening right now was saying, I would love to get started. I've been producing. I'm a quick writer. I've got the work ethic. I'm a good person. Like I'm a great communicator. All these things we talked about. What would you recommend their approach be as far as like shooting an email to that production house to work with them? Just a couple quick tips.
Well, basically what you need is, and this is again, like something that I cover systematically, step by step in my paid masterclass. In my free class, it's like you get an introduction to how things work and what you need to do, which I'm going to tell you very quickly right now in like this is all common sense. It's not rocket science. There are music production companies that exist solely for the purpose of writing music for commercials. This is who's responsible for the music for most of the commercials and most of the brands you see. So it follows that if you're going to create a relationship or begin a relationship with anybody, it's people within those companies. And those people within those companies are specifically called music producer or music director or creative director. So they are the chefs. They choose the cooks, which is like freelance musicians, freelance composers. So you need to get in touch with them. Now, how are you going to get in touch with them? Don't send them an email with your autobiography, 3 paragraphs, playing the flute at the age of 3, joined this band at the age of 7.
Yeah.
We were listed as one of the top most promising bands in Newmarket, Ontario region for 2 years in a row. Like, I know these are the things that come to your mind because a lot of us think about ourselves.
Right.
But realize that the difference between an amateur and a professional is that a professional is always focusing on the market, the audience. Okay, what do we do in order to create a reaction on the other end of the speaker? And not, I just want to make sure that they know that I was the most promising high school flute player. Does that solve the context of the problems that the music producer at a music production company is dealing with?
No, probably
not unless they're recording the flute.
Yeah.
Which might happen.
It could.
It could
Yeah.
happen. I'm
Small
not trying to
chances.
discount flute as a viable
Yeah.
instrument,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, think about the needs of those people. We are under high pressure, high deadlines. So I don't really have time to read autobiographies.
So
The
just
way I
keep it
scan
short and sweet is what you're saying.
the
Like,
way I scan my email inbox is like everybody scans their email inbox. If the email even looks ugly, I know within like split second that it's not relevant. Like it's not relevant. Like I'm gonna get to it, and I probably won't. So keep it short. Don't send me 10 SoundCloud links because you can't decide what's your best superpower.
right.
That already shows me you're indecisive, and that, a great craftsperson is somebody who confidently says, you know what? If you only have 30 seconds and I had to tell you what my superpower is, that will
Mhm.
help you have an edge.
Yeah.
Here are
So is that,
three things. Boom. And imagine I'm reading that, and then it's like some kid is telling me that he's going to give me an edge. And here are three things. It's like, okay, beautiful. I would say, and the method that I teach in the class is like, I literally show people how to build a website step by step that's going to capture attention in
okay.
less than 5 seconds. And front and center, it's going to have your best work. So that's the blueprint. That's the formula. Give me
Right.
one link in your email, in this brief email. Be nice, be courteous, don't be stiff. We're not selling vacuum cleaners. Show me that you're like, you're a
A real
dude. Like,
person. Yeah.
yeah, man, you're
Real
like a
human
human.
being.
I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, I'm trying to deal with people who are delightful, like
Yeah.
magicians, and not like somebody who can, I don't know, somebody who, it's not, to me, it's more important that you show me some magic than it is that you're overly polite or something, although that never hurts,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So then send me one link instead of like, because, if I go to SoundCloud and I'm checking out three links, that could be cool, but it's not really getting across your personality as much as your own website would.
Right. And that shows some professionalism too, having your own site. It's just a fact of
Your
the
own
matter,
domain, your own
Yeah.
domain, the email, not like Jim at Yahoo Cities 1955. Like, I mean, look, man, if you become a well-known, award-winning composer, then you should go back to an email like that, because then it's
Yeah.
cool.
Right.
It's like, then it's like, who cares, man?
Yeah.
I don't have a website. I don't even have a business. I don't have anything, and like people are beating on your door. So
Well,
simple, short email, crisp. Keep it casual. Keep it compelling. Link to a website, try to express your personality in that website, your work front and center.
mhm,
It shouldn't take me more than 10 seconds
right.
to have a first impression, even 5 seconds.
Yeah.
So like, that's why I recommend to people to build a reel where the first 5 seconds gets the attention, and it just keeps getting my attention, and like it's over before I know it. So it's not 7 minutes and I'm trying to find where
Right.
your
Yeah.
superpower is within those
Yep.
7 minutes.
It probably helps to also embed your own music on your site so you don't have to go off to another app like SoundCloud or something.
Exactly.
You just want to
Exactly.
be able to hit it and listen right there and make
That's
a quick
exactly
decision.
how that's exactly how I show people how to build it. It's
Yeah.
like, you have your headline, like describe, if you can, your magic sauce, play button, it plays
Mhm.
right away. Then if I want to hear more, below I have like buckets. So it's like, oh, here's electronic experimental, here is
Mhm.
classical, here, because usually people have buckets. It's like they
Right.
don't want to just be known for one thing.
Sure.
And then, yeah, and then ask for the next step, which is like, maybe a chat like this, a Skype call, or something like this, where I get to know your personality better. And it's all about following up also. But
Mhm.
yeah, music production companies, that's who you want to target. And
Sure. That's good insight, man. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah, no worries.
Yeah. No, and honestly, like I told you, selfishly, I also wanted to have you on the podcast because I myself am curious to learn more about this whole realm of what all this looks like and everything. So, yeah, there's a lot of good info for listeners to chew on here. And I want to respect your time. I know that we're getting close on time, but Tommy Z, everybody, check it out. I'll include all the links in the show notes to your masterclass and to your free course, and links
Thank
to
you.
your social as well. But yeah, man, thank you for joining. It's been good hanging out for a minute.
My pleasure, brother. All the
Yeah,
best to you. And let's stay in touch.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. Do you personally make this is something I was gonna ask earlier, I just forgot. Do you still make a lot of music for yourself? I know that you're crazy busy or
Not
your own
really, not really,
projects.
not really, but I do. It's in the back of my mind. And well, I shouldn't say I don't because I do, but it's not
Mhm.
like with a definite purpose.
Like a you don't have like a whole project that you're working
No,
on for
no.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
basically, I will just sit down with I might take my OP1 and
Oh,
just
nice.
on the couch
Those are
and
those are fun, man. I love
yeah,
those things. I just played with one for the first time a month ago, and I, like, couldn't put it down.
yeah. So I might just do that. There are just these feelings I get sometimes. Like I'll be sitting there Sunday and I'll be like, oh, I really want to make some music, you know?
Yeah.
And so I do it then, you know, and it's just like it's not. It's funny, man, because I I have like a million sketches.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all over the different hard drives. Even now that I make music for commercials, like I have these millions of sketches, and you think they're not going to go anywhere, but like, you know, I was recently working on a Facebook ad for my master class, and I'm like, I need some music behind this. So I'm
Yeah.
like, where am I going to get music from? And the worst thing was like the
Where am
song
I
I
gonna
wanted
get
to use, the song I wanted to use is something that I distributed through a platform, um, through AWOL,
Okay.
which like distributes your music
Yeah,
to various
yeah.
services. And I'm like, well, if I use this, then my own ad is gonna get
Flagged.
blocked. Yeah,
Is
my own ad is
yeah.
gonna get flagged, which
That's
is a
funny.
problem. Like, shoot. So then I just went into the sketches that I've been doing,
Yeah.
and I always name them intuitively. And like, you know, massive attackish or whatever, like
Mhm.
whatever the sound is.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, there it is, man. Like last few weeks, I put together some sketches. I always put an exclamation mark on the sketch if it's notable.
Nice.
And I ended up using that. So that's why I say to people, like, harness your um, harness your archives. There's probably like millions of things that you have done. Don't let them go to waste. You could
Yeah.
send them to a music library site. You
Mhm.
could use it to put together a portfolio. Um,
What are some library sites that you'd recommend? I'm just curious.
I'm not a big expert on those because like we don't actually use them. So
Right.
I couldn't tell you like I know of some, but I wouldn't want to like steer people that way because I don't even know if they're any good or if
Right.
so you know, it's not
Right.
really my domain.
Sure. By the way, I don't know if this would ever be helpful for you in the future or not, but I had a guy hit me up the other day who just developed a new site. It's called timestamps.fm.
Yeah,
And have you used it or heard of it?
no,
It's what it does is you upload the .als file in Ableton to the site, and it works really easy. And it shoots out a timestamp with the time on the timeline and the name of your locator. So you can just create locators, and it spits them
uh,
out like all the timing of each locator as like a little reference as
yeah,
timestamps.
man, that's
It,
great.
if that's ever helpful for you, I don't know, but
I might consider that when I'm actually, you know, doing podcasts or things like this, like of my
yeah,
own, because that would be a very valuable
I
tool.
was impressive. Yeah, I put it in the chat
Yeah, yeah,
timestamps.fm.
yeah. Yeah, I'm
But
gonna check that out.
cool. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate your time again, and
Thanks,
yeah,
man.
stay healthy and everything.
Yeah, you too, man. Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Thanks. See ya.
Later.